I hadn't thought about that numerical target, but that sounds like the right thing to do. And I will commit to moving that direction as quickly as we can, maybe beating that number if we can. Is Giles here somewhere? Great. Thank you for that question. As you know, this isn't just a security question. This is a moral question. What kind of country locks people up when they are fleeing what we're fighting, when they're fleeing violence and terrorism? This country is a beacon for a reason. My city was largely built by immigrants. So was my family. I'm the son of an immigrant. I'm here because of that process, because my father knew that this was the best country in the world to get an education, and he chose to become an American after he went through that process. And we've got a broken immigration system that unfortunately is more useful. If the administration solved it, it would be an achievement. But it's more useful to them as a crisis, unsolved, than it is as an achievement if they had actually resolved it. It will not remain that kind of crisis on my watch, I promise you.
Next question. I'm going to mix them up a little bit so everybody gets a fair chance. All right. Let's see. One of the Zabners wants to know.
Where are you?
Kinneret wants to know.
Hello.
Answer the question you asked Ted Kennedy in 2003.
Oh my. Was that about Democrats being kind of for whatever Republicans are for, except a little bit less? Yeah. He was giving this big speech when I was in college, and I went to see him speak, and I got up, and there's, I guess this surfaced today or yesterday online, so you can see what a 20-year-old version of me looks like. Actually not that different. And it was on my mind then, and it's on my mind now. You know, I think the Democratic Party has become more forceful in opposing Republican policies than before, and I think that's good. But we can't organize our politics around their politics. We can't tell our story just by keying it off of theirs. We can't have the only internal debate among Democrats to be how fiercely to oppose or how gently to imitate Republican policies. But this is part of what I mean when I talk about how the Reagan era started in 1980, but it went all the way till more or less now. Is that for as long as I've been alive, Democratic and Republican presidents have been operating on a framework where, for example, the only thing you'd ever do to a tax is cut it, even though we know there are some people and some companies in this country that are now not paying their fair share. Where we had Democrats in power whose strategy often on criminal justice, because they felt they had to prove how tough on crime they were, was just lock people up. All of these things that don't make a lot of sense. We tried them. Boy, did we give conservatism a try, right? We listened to the folks who said the only thing we ought to do to a tax is cut it, even on the wealthiest, and that would pay for itself. And we listened to the people who said, you know, you got to cut the regulations on banks. What's the worst that could happen? And we listened to the people who said that we really needed to we absolutely have to go to war in Iraq. There's just we just got to do it. Keep America safe. And we listened to the people who said through the 90s and the 2000s, you know, climate's made up. It's not a problem. Even if it's happening, it'll go back down. It'll take care of itself. So we really shouldn't do anything about it. And by the way, that for some reason it was really important to American society that people like me not be able to get married. Okay. And we're just done listening to that sort of thing. I talked about this all day, but that's probably a good note to end on.
Next question. Here we go. You know, I don't have my reading glasses on. So. Sydney wants to know, and I think Sydney may be very young, but this person wants to know, what are you going to do about Putin?
Oh, all right. Sydney here? Hi, Sydney. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your question. I appreciate it. I'm pretty worried about the activity of Russia. Are you concerned about how Russia's behaving? Yes. Me too. And it's not that everybody living in Russia is bad. It's a country with so many people, just like our country. But you look at the behavior of their leadership, and it is not good, largely because they don't have the kind of democracy that we have. And I believe our policy has to be to support democracy and human rights everywhere. Now, they attacked our democracy, right, by using social media to trick us into turning against each other, and by helping this president get elected because they believed it would make America weaker, and they were probably right. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the good news is America has a whole bunch of different tools when we're trying to pressure or just encourage a different country to do things differently. It's not just, you hear a lot about starting wars, but we don't need a war right now. We have a lot of other tools. We have economic tools. We can impose economic penalties on countries that do bad things. We have diplomatic tools, because every country wants to be respected. And if we make it so around the world, part of how you become more respected is to do the right thing, whether it's to become more democratic, or to respect human rights, or to be part of the solution on climate, which, as you know, is a really big issue. Then it will challenge a country like Russia to show that they're starting to do the right thing. But for that to work, we've got to have our own house in order first, right? We've got to be convincing when we say that. We also have a lot of cybersecurity tools we didn't used to have. And so what I'm getting at is that if we make it clear that if they do something to hurt us again, that we would be ready to use economic, diplomatic, or technological means to push back on them, I think we can make it so they won't do it again to begin with. And that would be my goal for dealing with the Putin regime.
And we get a question from Gary, who wants to know, I guess the short version, what is your climate change policy?
All right. So, as I said, we're
Here.
it's always better when I can see you.
Oh.
Oh, there you are. Thank you. So thanks for raising what I think is probably going to be the dominant issue that decides whether my generation, and definitely the generation to come, has a shot at a good life. It is an economic and security and moral crisis. Part of what I'm getting at when I talk about generational justice, that each of us has an obligation to make sure the next generation lives well. And, oops. And so we can do some very specific things now that'll make a difference. First thing we got to do is we got to have a carbon fee or carbon tax and dividend. Now, politicians are not supposed to use the T word, but honesty is really important, so I'm gonna call it what it is. But what does that actually mean? What it means is that we make sure the price of activities that put a lot of carbon in the atmosphere reflects the long-term cost that they have for society. Because we're going to pay it one way or the other. It's just that if we pay it up front, we can prevent climate change from biting us. But how do we make sure that that doesn't make us all worse off, right? I mean, if that makes it more expensive to drive, if that makes it more expensive to farm, we could be creating a problem. That's why I think what we ought to do is take all of the money that's collected through that and rebate it right back out to the American people. And do it in a progressive way. So that for most of us, we are better off after this was added than before. But meanwhile, we've changed the signals that the economy sends around what's okay. So that's the thing we got to do. Another thing we got to do is at least quadruple U.S. federal research and development on things that could make this problem better. You hear a lot about renewables, that's part of it. But I think we also need to do a lot on energy storage, because battery technology has a long way to go. And maybe even carbon storage, ways to take carbon out of the atmosphere. Not as an excuse to keep putting it back in, but because without that, it's going to be very hard to meet our goals. If we, as I will, for example, recommit to Paris and start going beyond that. mention one other thing that I think is important, especially when we're in rural communities. I think a lot of rural Americans hear about climate and they feel like we're beating them over the head with it, like we're telling them they're part of the problem. Now, of course, rural America has a lot to lose because of the climate disruption that's happening. I mean, I'm seeing waterlogged fields, and I know that climate and weather aren't the same thing, but they sure are related. And yet the message has been that this could be at the expense of rural America. I actually think the quest for a net zero emissions farm is one of the most exciting projects America could take on. It would be an incredible contribution to the world. And we know that from soil management to the way that fleet and equipment work, we could move in that direction. And it would be an amazing way to ask rural America to help lead us in getting this right. And I think we got to flip the script on that, because everybody's got to be part of this. Dealing with climate has to be a national project. Just like the national project that was kicked off with the Pearl Harbor bombing, that we had to rise and fight, or the national project that started when we realized what was happening with the Soviet Union when they put a satellite in space before. Only this time we have a national project that isn't just about fighting other human beings, which is kind of a nice quality for it to have. The national project is to conquer climate and lead the world in doing so. And I think it will help us all stand taller, it will help us organize our efforts, and it will help us secure the future.